viable and affordable alternatives to the energy resources. As the technology advances and also investment grows, everyone in the morning talking about the renewable energy growth in China as well as globally, we truly believe the renewable energy will become the leading energy source with some predictions probably in 2030. So as a renewable energy practitioner, we are not against any format of the fossil fuel energy. We believe dependence on any single format of energy is pose potential risk. And that's why we said the balanced approach, a right mix at a different micro level is required, and we believe we will continue to grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was always brought up ladies first, and as we have a real lady on the panel by title as well as being a real lady, I think it'd be appropriate to talk about nuclear power and its role in the energy mix, and certainly when it comes to uncertainty. You know, there's been so much debate about energy and its role and public trust and how different governments are reacting. And I think given that we've got on the panel representatives from Middle East, we're closely looking at nuclear energy from Germany, we're switched off, and Japan, and further down the line. It'd be really good. So my question is to Lady Barbara Judge. What is the role of nuclear in the energy mix, and how does nuclear help us in this era of uncertainty?
Well, the reason I went through those statistics before was just to explain that notwithstanding Fukushima, the nature of energy security leads to at least putting nuclear in part of the mix. Here we are in Southeast Asia. Singapore has said for a number of years that it wasn't the right place to put a big nuclear power plant. Of course it's not. But actually Vietnam at the moment is thinking about putting a power plant in, and it's got to deal with the Russians on the table, although they've just delayed it. Malaysia, Indonesia, they have been discussing putting nuclear power plants in as part of their energy mix. As I said before, China, India are already doing it. What I believe is that true energy security, it was sort of said here, comes from a bouquet of energy sources. You can look at renewables, and it's very admirable what the Germans have done in terms of ramping up their investment in renewables when they took out nuclear. But you still need baseload generation. No matter what, that's what coal provides, baseload generation, oil, gas, fossil fuels. If you just rely on renewables totally like they want to in Scotland, sun and wind are very nice, but someday you're going to come home and turn the lights on. It'll be a cold, still, dark night, and you won't have any lights. So you need to have baseload generation as well as renewable power, whatever you do. And I don't disagree about the coal point. If you have nothing else, you need to burn coal. The interesting thing about nuclear is, A, we all know the things I told you, energy independence, energy security, climate change, but there's a lot of public acceptance involved. You have to get the public to believe and to understand what nuclear energy is about, that the safety statistics on nuclear are actually better than coal, gas, any of them, and that the public needs to trust it. In Japan, where the Prime Minister knows perfectly well that nuclear energy needs to come back, there's a big effort in order to get the public to understand what's going on. In Germany, when Mrs. Merkel turned off the power plants, it was partly a political proposition. I wouldn't dream of discussing it because we have an expert here, but there was a lot of politics around turning off the power plants. So in my opinion, true energy security comes from a bouquet of energy sources. And until every child has enough heat and light to read, we cannot throw away any kind of energy sources. What we need to do with nuclear is understand that different kinds of nuclear are right for different countries. And my opinion is, based on some conversations in Singapore, is that maybe because the landmass is small and it's very much utilized, maybe the new kinds of nuclear, the small modular reactors that are being developed now in many countries, maybe they will be appropriate for nuclear energy to add to the mix in Singapore, especially some of the reactors that are being discussed, which are small, modular, and underground, so that there's a lot more opportunity to use them in a small place like this. My suggestion is that we must keep studying nuclear because it is a source of clean baseload generation, which is very hard to find, and that the Singaporeans particularly are so good at studying things and making real changes in what used to be the established order that it may happen. One last point. When I started as chairman of the Atomic Energy Authority in the UK in 2004, nuclear was off the table. All my agency was meant to do was decommission nuclear power plants. That was our job. And today, last week, many of you will have read, the UK made a big deal to do nuclear with the Chinese. So it's about 10 years from no nuclear to we're embracing three different nuclear power plants, two run by the Japanese, Hitachi and Toshiba. They've already been agreed, and now the Chinese. So 10 years can make a big difference as to what is energy security.
Thank you. I'll come to you in a minute, Klaus, if I could. Sorry, I'll come to you as well in a minute. I was going to ask Mr. Maraki-san, just as we got Tokyo Gas, your advisor to Tokyo Gas. It must be a massive period of uncertainty coming forwards now as to kind of the gas requirement in Japan. What are you advising Tokyo Gas?
Yeah, it's the uncertainty coming from the supply side and also the market side, particularly in Japan, as the power market liberalization, the final stage of the full liberalization will start next year, and 1 year later the gas market will be fully liberalized. So we face an intensified the competition in the market. And at the same time, a different type of energy coming into the Asian market. So we need to make best portfolio management, how to utilize an LNG with the oil-linked and Henry Hub-linked US LNG, more flexible energies. That will be the challenge for us in this in the next several years. However, we have infrastructures, we have a very strong position on the market. So how to utilize those positions, particularly that we have access to the market. So if we have a good portfolio management, I think it's the this is the opportunity for us.
Thank you. Before I get to you, Klaus, Dr. Flores Quiroga.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, because I have a couple of points that I think follow directly from what has been said. Let me emphasize three aspects of policy that are key in an energy strategy to support the goal of energy security. And this is important, and I'll give you an example for each of them, all of them related to one country. Of course, it's diversification, which has been mentioned. The second one is interdependence, which has been mentioned a little bit less. And the third one, in the context of the very last comment, has to do with consistency of policy, competition, a long-term perspective. Why is this relevant? The example that I would like to bring to our attention, again, is Japan and what happened in Fukushima. If Japan had followed a policy of independence with the Fukushima accident, instead of a policy of interdependence, Japan's economy would not be where it is now. The fact that there was interdependence and diversification allowed Japanese authorities, energy authorities, to react to this disaster by resorting to other fuels that could, for the time being, or for whatever term the Japanese people decide, help with this disruption. So this is an argument not against nuclear, because I do think, and I do agree with what Lady Barbara just has said about the role of nuclear. It's an argument that even if one believes strongly in the contribution of a particular fuel, we have to keep in mind that diversification and interdependence matter. And of course, interdependence requires embracing the possibility, the opportunities of international cooperation and engagement. To bring again the example from Japan, but I could also use Singapore, you have here a very successful economy that relies on imported energy. And that means that, you have to diversify your sources of imports, not only of fuels, but also of countries, in order to get the type of resilience that you require if you want long-term energy security. And as I have said, long-term vision, consistency of policy is what matters. Competition does help, but the rules have to be clear, and that's no easy task, especially now that the public is more and more engaged in what goes on in the energy sector. That's where the social license plays also a role. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And turning to you, Klaus, just to get a view from being a key member of an energy company in Germany, it'd be interesting just to get the German point of view on nuclear. I mean, the EU is a place where there's very big countries that have nuclear power and very big countries that don't. Is nuclear off the table now for Germany? And the point about connectivity as well. Some of the countries that don't have nuclear are connected to those that do. So there's a little bit of a kind of imbalance in kind of public perception. Not really a comment, but I'll just let you say what you want to say.
Obviously smiling because you're perfectly right in your last comment here. But first, in terms of role of nuclear, and obviously I agree with what Lady Judge said. I think clearly sort of like nuclear should be part of the system and part of the mix. I think the decision that Germany did was a very unique decision and one that I have not seen in that form repeated anywhere else. I think that started in 2000 with an agreement between the government and the operators. Then we went on a roller coaster in terms of prolongation of the lifetime of the existing plants. And then obviously that very harsh and very brutal reaction after the incident at Fukushima, where again Germany canceled the prolongation, took certain plans out then, and sort of like was very firm that by 22 it will be finished. And I believe this will not change in Germany. Yet there's just simply also in the population a majority that is against nuclear, and I cannot see a German government again reversing that opinion again. But we also have to see that across Europe, obviously nuclear has a commercial challenge, and we should also not forget that. We see in Sweden at power prices that Europe has today that actually nuclear power plants are no longer commercially viable. We will see 4 reactors actually closing down for that reason. And obviously the UK reactors, which we will see as new ones, I mean, they only come to life because of essentially a tariff that the government provides in terms of making these projects viable. And I think this is simply what I said also earlier. I believe this topic of security of supply is no longer a topic that can and will be left to markets, because I believe markets will only give inadequate signals in terms of supporting that. We'll see that on nuclear, as the example has shown. We see it on renewable, obviously, which work only on feed-in tariffs, at least up to now. We'll see it also on gas, where some gas infrastructure, be it pipelines or LNG terminals in Europe, are being built with support of the European Commission in order to create that security of supply. And we see it in terms of the backup power plants which are needed, fossil power plants in Europe, where capacity markets are being established to deliver exactly that, a mechanism in terms of awarding a price for security of supply. And I think this is absolutely needed in terms of having that guarantee for the future that ultimately our systems and our energy systems will work.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move along now. We talk about energy security, but there's quite a number of people in the world who haven't got any energy at all. They can't switch on the light bulb, they haven't got clean materials for cooking. In Southeast Asia, there's about over 100 million people who can't switch on a light bulb. It'd be very interesting to move on to the role of renewables. And I'm looking at Girish and Dr. Kayat as well, just to sort of maybe comment on kind of Now, how is the role of renewables helping the have-nots? And maybe you could give us a scale of what you're doing in renewables in India and if that's helping the have-nots. And then turn to you, Dr. Kayat, and get a similar view for the Middle East, if that's okay.
Well, thank you. Still early days in terms of resolving the issues or even providing a solution for that, but it started off. And the use of renewables in terms of off-grid solutions is what really will make a difference. That's number one. The second is the learning from our German friends in terms of rooftop solar, which is a big program in India. And the initial net metering seems to be promising. Larger commercial organizations, larger government organizations are going in for solar rooftops because they have the space and are signing up for net metering. Of course, right now it's in a couple of places, but we expect it to pick up quite a bit. So off-grid solutions, rooftop, and the third sort of renewable energy advantage that India is looking at is in terms of wind and offshore wind. So although it's still a little distance and also very costly, but the initial steps towards offshore wind have been taken. I'll remind the audience also that India is the fourth largest producer of wind power in the world. It's got a large capacity for wind, and the target over the next 5 years is another 60 gigawatts. So that's quite substantial, and if we can get into offshore wind, that would be really useful. Even at present, I just want to leave the thought with you, besides the 12% of renewable energy capacity, another 18 to 19% is large hydro, which is actually renewable energy. So if you combine both of them, we are around 31% of installed capacity for a large country like India as of now, which is based on renewables. So this is the situation at present.
Okay. And is there anything specific to target that towards the people who haven't got energy at the moment?
Well, like I said, there are two ways that you can approach this. One is the off-grid, mini-grid solution. The other is the government's other major program of pushing the grid into remote areas and providing access there. That's one of the aims that the present government has. Also in terms of using energy efficiency initiatives like, for example, the LED bulb. That's a very big program in India. And it makes sense because if you couple it with renewable energy, it's a real solution. And please don't forget that lighting is the major issue. I mean, that's one of the basic issues in a village today. Lighting is the number one issue. So if you link up renewable energy with an initiative like the LED, you come out winners at least for the basic.
Okay, thank you. Keep moving along to Dr. Kayat and
Okay, thank
your
you very
agency's role.
Okay, thank you very much. As I mentioned, prices for renewable energy, and specific wind and solar, are now competitive to the conventional. But to be fair enough, I think we have to consider the dispatchability for renewable energy to make it more reliable. In this regard, we have to exert great efforts in the R&D for storage systems. Considering storage system for large-scale renewable energy projects increases its prices, which makes it non-competitive, but considering storage for rooftop and small-scale renewable energy projects could make it more reliable too. In this regard, and to increase the dispatchability of renewable energy, we have to exert great efforts, in fact, in the R&D regarding storage system, and also more reliable systems for forecasting systems, either for wind or solar, which make it predictable and able to be one of the retails in the spot market. Also, we have to rely on the policies, which is totally linked with renewable energy. And in this regard, and in Egypt, what I can say is that for the last 2 years, couple of years, 2014 and 2015, there is a fruit leap in the policies for renewable energy. We adopted a feed-in tariff program targeting to install 4,300 megawatt from both wind and solar. The announcement for all of these projects already done by November 2014. Lands are allocated for the investors by January 2015. Consequently, they already started their processes to measure, to perform specific studies, and it is expected to install all of these projects, inshallah, by the end of 2016. Consequently, renewable energy is so sensitive regarding the policies. Also regarding subsidies, we already adopted a plan to reduce fuel subsidy. It will be phased out during the coming 4 years. It already started 2014. And also there is a law, clear law, for investing in renewable energy and also for electricity. From all of these issues, I think renewable energy is one of the key players during the coming years, and it has to be on the table, not to be shifted out based on there is a cheap oil or cheap gas. It has to be one of the main players, especially in countries have enormous resources from both wind and solar energies. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that are coming through the app, and thanks very much. The first question, I think Dr. Luo, you could have a first stab at it, but others can join in. So it's a question that's got 4 votes. And the question is, can energy security be achieved in Egypt, India, and China without the use of subsidies, regardless of the mix?
So, Tim, you want me to answer these questions as in China?
Put you right on the spot.
Yeah, people ask me this kind of question a lot. I think it is. If you look at your because we are the largest solar operators in China. If you look at the cost of operating a solar farm, okay, the capex is issue, but as the technology advances, the solar installation has coming down by more than 10 times. Okay, then the second element for the operation cost is the financing cost. So I made a comparable story. I said China electricity retailing price right now for the residential and education is about 10 US cents per kilowatt hour. But for the industry, for the commercial, is about 15 to 18 US cents per kilowatt hour. So if I have a US or Singapore interest rate as my financing rate to build in, I don't need any government support for the solar farm operations, because the financing cost in China is still over 7.5% to 8%. That's the second key element to drive this we call LC or levelized cost of electricity generation. Okay, that's why we are doing the business globally, and not just in China. We signed the PPA, the power purchase agreement in US and European, with a little over 3.5 euro cents, or maybe to 5-6 US cents, we can achieve comparable cost versus the fossil fuel. So because the interest rate in China is very much regulated by the government. The government announced last week that they cut their 0.25% of interest rate. It's going to significantly help us. But I said if they can cut interest rate to 2%. For the solar farm, whether it's large-scale utilities, whether it's distributed generation, we don't need any government support from now on.
Okay, Mr. Pradhan and Mr. Ka, any comments on that? So the question is, can energy security be achieved without the use of subsidies regardless of the mix?
Well, there's no way that you can remove subsidies overnight and expect that whatever the mix, things will go according to business as usual. So the phasing out of subsidies, there's no argument on that. There's no debate. You do have to, in the long term, phase out these subsidies if you want energy to be priced at a real cost. So that's a given. I would tend to agree with my friend that especially in India, you do require subsidies in terms of renewable energy right now. A, because the equipment cost is still high, number one. Number two, the interest costs are very high. It's still very difficult to convince a banker in India to go in for lending to renewable energy. In his heart of heart, he would consider it a risky proposition. So therefore, the government support as well as some amount of subsidy would be required. The third area where subsidies play a role is in areas which have traditionally been supported by government, like agriculture and the socially weaker, economically weaker sections. So these would necessarily continue for some time. Therefore, the answer has to be in a yes and a no.
Thank you very much. Let's see if the answer is different down this end.
In fact, I was intended to say yes and no too. But why? Regarding fossil fuel, there is a clear subsidy for fossil fuel. In Egypt, last year government spent $20 billion as a subsidy for fossil. Meanwhile, there were no subsidy for renewable energy. It seems strange. Also, it depends according to the scheme of applying renewable energy. For feed-in tariff, no. It needs subsidy. If it is an auction scheme, no, it doesn't need. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Of course, it's not just renewables that need investment and subsidies or whatever you want to call it, but perhaps from a nuclear point of view, Lady Barbara, kind of how nuclear can work without government support.
I think, harking back to my German colleague who said the price of nuclear power is very expensive. Frankly, at this point in the world, nuclear power plants, to start building them, are very expensive, and they need some kind of government help, whether it's subsidy or loan guarantees. Today, but as we've just heard, almost all kinds of energy needs government help. Renewables are getting subsidies, fossil fuel gets some kind of help, nuclear is getting help to do new build. I think the important thing is, as Dr. Barrow said this morning, is that if there are going to be some subsidies, some government help, some guaranteed, there needs to be